The British are coming. The British are coming. Paul Revere, one of the greatest patriots of our nation's history. I look at this guy right here as 21st century's Paul Revere, and he's been sounding the alarm. Patriots, I have John Guandolo here with me today. He has been a fighter to expose the truth about Sharia and Muslim Brotherhood, all of those problems that we see in Texas. Appreciate you joining us today, sir.
I'm glad to be on with you. Thanks for having me.
As you know, we've had the Proposition 10 as part of the Republican Party primary, and 95% of the Republicans said that we need to end Sharia law in Texas, and we did that to expose the issue, especially to the what's happening in North Texas, and to bring up the issue's importance in next state convention. Texans, we believe in religious freedom. We're not debating that. What we are talking about is Sharia law, which is a political system essentially. And there's a lot of confusion about it, and frankly, a lot of misunderstandings about it around the topic and the religion. So what is it, what isn't? That's what we're going to talk about. So thank you for coming over and having this conversation with us.
Absolutely. I'm looking forward to it.
Why don't you introduce yourself? I've read your bio. You've done everything. So let's start from who you are, then we can go into the topics.
Okay. So I'm John Guandolo. I'm grew up in Maryland. Thank God. As my sister said, I should have been born in Texas, but I've been here about 8 years.
Yeah.
In the DFW area. Grateful to be in Texas. I'm a Naval Academy graduate. I served as an officer in the Marine Corps Infantry and Reconnaissance units. I'm a combat veteran. I left the FBI, or I left the Marine Corps to join the FBI, and served almost 13 years in the criminal division, my first 4.5 years or so, and then in the counterterrorism division for most of the rest of that time, and came to understand post 9/11 through investigations that there is a massive jihadi network and movement in the United States. Yeah. But because the vast majority of what they're doing is they wear suits, they act nice and friendly, and it's much more an espionage, counterintelligence, subversion war for them than it is shooting. And actually the violence that they do here in the United States and elsewhere actually supports the much larger 90 to 95% of their war, which is nonviolent, which is taking over. It's conquering really without firing a shot, or rarely having to fire a shot, although it will go kinetic in a big way in the United States, but not yet. And so I came to see that, and I created, because I saw agents and analysts and police officers that were on the Joint Terrorism Task Force who didn't understand this, I started teaching and training and created the first program in the government on the Islamic movement and how they do what they do, the networks, the modus operandi, the doctrine. And that's what I've been doing. And in 2008, got recruited out of the FBI by the Department of Defense to do strategic analysis, not only on the Islamic movement, but on the communist movement as well, and how they work together and what they're doing globally, yes, but primarily domestically. And when that program got defunded in 2012, I've been doing it privately now for 13 and a half years.
You mentioned that they wear suits and, they're part of the system now. You look at 9/11, then you look at today in New York, and you have Mamdani as the mayor. Have you ever thought in 25 years from 9/11, we're going to have a Muslim as a mayor of the city in the world?
So sadly, without any pushback, yes, this is how they operate. I mean, and he's a jihadi. I mean, now we know. I mean, those of us that do this work, we knew who he was before he took office. But he's a jihadi. He supports jihadis. He's wearing a suit, and this is the problem.
Let's talk about what Sharia law is and what is it, because in Republican circles, which is primarily this podcast is going to be aired at, they're gonna say, well, yeah, it's a legal system. They know that much, but if you can explain in depth what it is and why is it against our Constitution, and why is it the Republican Party and the state of Texas and the U.S. government is pushing back, and it should be doing a lot more than what we're doing today.
Great starting point for this conversation. So Sharia is a law, according to Islam, is Allah's law. It's the perfect law for all humans for all times. And so it must be imposed on the earth. And so when I start speaking with groups, I normally ask a couple questions. One, what does Islam say its purpose is? And whether we talk about, I have here the most widely used tabletop book of Islamic law in North America, or the most widely used textbook for seventh graders in Islamic schools in the United States. And what it says is the purpose of Islam is to wage war against non-Muslims to establish Sharia on earth. That's it.
Very simple.
It's very simple.
Right.
And the second question I ask is, why is it that what our leaders at the national level especially, but even state leaders have been saying, I'll start with the Clinton administration because that's really when this started, to today, that they tell us that true Islam, some mystical version of Islam that's not taught in any mosque or Islamic school, is good and peaceful. Mm-hmm. And that what Al-Qaeda and other people do is radical. And I just say, well, why is it that what our leaders say about Islam is exactly opposite of what Muslims teach Muslim children about Islam in U.S. Islamic schools?
That's important.
Yeah. So if you read, and I want to start, I will use this as a reference because when I do lengthy programs for law enforcement that are multiple days,
right,
they get an overload on Sharia. Okay. And when I teach, I always have them read from the book with a microphone to the class. So they don't think, because this isn't me, I'm just a messenger.
Right.
But if you open this book, the most widely used textbook in U.S. Islamic schools, on the very first page, it says, Islam is not a religion, however, but a complete way of life. And it goes on to explain that complete way of life is governed by Allah's law, Sharia. It explains it comes from the Quran and the example of Prophet Muhammad, and then explains what that means. This book also says that those who, first of all, it says the 3 duties right here on page 162. One of the 3 duties is jihad. And when you say, well, you mean, of course, spiritual yoga, well, actually not. Because I'll show it to the camera. This is a picture of a tank.
Right.
In case the little children are confused. And it says this.
Is. Yeah.
If anyone dies in jihad, they automatically will go to paradise. A shaheed or martyr is described this way by Allah. By Allah, don't think that those who were killed in Allah's cause are dead. No, they are alive, finding their bounty in the presence of the Lord. Now, this is interesting because at the end of the book, it says the basis for the legal and political system is the Sharia of Allah, and the duty of Muslim citizens is to enforce the Islamic State, to be loyal to the Islamic State. And that's a quote. And so if we just start with that, I would say, well, that's exactly opposite of what we've been told for over 30 years
by our politicians,
by our leaders on both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
And here's part of the reason. These leaders have people, usually men, who are advising them that are Muslims. And so what they're telling them about Islam is not true. Or if you think that's too harsh, it's exactly opposite of what Muslims are teaching Muslim children in Islamic schools. So somebody's lying.
Right.
And here's
this is on 7th grade level?
Yep. In U.S. Islamic schools. And we have found copy of these in Texas, in multiple cities. We found copies, 14 copies, in Goodfellow Air Force Base in San Angelo in their prayer room, because they have a Muslim prayer room, or they did. I'm told they did away with it, but I'm not buying it because I was in there when it existed.
Yeah.
But maybe they have. Here's the point. They also had other books in there teaching jihad and the imposition of Sharia. On a U.S. military base that just happens to be the base where Air Force intelligence officers are trained. So you have to understand this is a war for them.
Right.
And they go to certain places and they do certain things for a reason. They don't do willy-nilly. So when you ask about what is Sharia, Sharia is Allah's law. It's comprehensive. It's military, political, religious, social, cultural, all of it.
Everything.
Wrapped up.
Right.
right? So you said it. Islam is a totalitarian system governed by real law.
Yeah.
And until we get over ourselves, that somehow that's uncomfortable to say, we're losing the war right now. We're losing the war in Texas, and we're going to lose if this isn't rapidly turned around. Because if you look across the board on all metrics, and I'll just talk about Texas, we'll talk about whatever part of the country you'd like, and I can give examples from pretty much every state. But here in Texas, they're steamrolling us. Yeah. And they have moved some of their prominent leaders into Texas, into positions to literally shepherd, if you will, guide, lead the jihad here in Texas. And they are preparing for violent jihad. But so far, they haven't had a need to do it because for the most part, our mayors and a lot of leaders in elected positions are taking a knee.
Yeah, they're pandering to it. I mean, Texas House have consistently for the multiple sessions celebrated Ramadan month and Muslim month and Pakistani month and all of those good stuff, that they come back and say, well, we have religious freedom. And that's the pushback we get as grassroots members from our own legislators who are Republicans. My House rep was one of the people who did that, and I sent a letter to my district, well, two of them, stating that during the primary election, saying, if you want someone who's going to continue to pander to this ideology, you keep electing that person. If not, find somebody else. Find somebody who would have a backbone to stand and do the right thing. The religious freedom aspect of our Constitution, which is probably one of the most founding principles that our country has, that is still in existence. I think the Muslims are taking advantage of it by using that. So you obviously gone through this cycle multiple times, and then tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think this is, I just got a note yesterday from someone, and they literally say, what can we do? And this is somebody who's a conservative, patriotic American. Yeah. What can we do? The Constitution and the law ties our hands. And that's just stupid. And I think it's cowardly and it's surrender.
Right.
Of course. Are you saying the Constitution says if someone's trying to discard the founding principles, the Constitution and federal law, that the Constitution allows for that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's not sane thinking. But this is, I think it's it really makes me wonder if reason thought has completely been washed away in a lot of people. And here's why. What the Islamic movement is doing, and I will just talk about in the United States, is they are waging war, total war. Again, not primarily violent,
right,
but total war. Counterintelligence, espionage, subversion, economic warfare, all of it, on the society in order to overthrow the government and replace it with an Islamic state under Sharia. Not only is that what they teach their children, it's what Islamic law requires. And you and I talking before this interview, you mentioned it. You can just watch videos of Islamic leaders in the United States, including many in Texas. The Constitution requires an oath to be taken, right, when people get elected.
Yeah.
And the fidelity to that oath means you will do everything within your authority to ensure nothing overthrows the Constitution. Yeah. And I just heard, what is his name? Paul Dan's running for Senate in South Carolina, saying, well, if they, replace the Constitution with Sharia and they use the democratic process to do so, there's not, then it's a good thing. That's traitorous talk.
That's a treason.
I had a private briefing with the Attorney General of Colorado 10 years ago, John Suthers, a Republican, who became the mayor of Colorado Springs. And he said something almost, he's like, John, if they want to replace the Constitution and do it nonviolently, there's nothing we can do. And I said, sir, you took an oath to ensure that never happens. I mean, that is traitorous talk.
Yeah.
And this is coming from, these are Republicans, people that claim to be Republicans. So first of all, if we talk Texas, in Texas law, it's a state felony to commit sedition, to conspire to overthrow the state constitution, which is what the Islamic movement is doing in Texas.
Right.
You know, as an FBI agent, I investigated and worked with prosecutors to prosecute cases that were RICO cases, you know, racketeering cases.
Yeah.
This is a war, and it has to be fought as a war. But part of that can be using the legal system. We're not going to win it, right? We're not going to win this war because wars aren't won in the courtroom. They're not won by legislating it. They're not won by creating new policy. Wars are won by identifying and vanquishing the enemy,
Right.
first of all. But if we use the RICO statute and we talk about this, then every action they're taking, opening up a new halal restaurant, forcing, you know, halal meals in Texas schools, opening up a mosque, doing these things. And we know what's going on in those places. If you understand what these places are, then we wouldn't be giving state money, for instance, to known Muslim Brotherhood organizations, known jihadi organizations, but we're giving hundreds of millions of dollars we have over the last 10 years to these organizations. And I'm hoping, I'd like to just make the assumption that it's being done out of ignorance and naivete. But if you're an elected official or an appointed official and you've sworn an oath to the Constitution, that's not one of your choices.
That's right.
You have a professional standard to know when you're giving taxpayer dollars away that they are or are not going to terrorist organizations or jihadi organizations supporting terrorism, literally.
Yeah. You are a fiduciary of the state. We elected you to represent us.
That's
and
right.
You have our dollars. And
That's right.
You are bound to have a fiduciary duty to the people. And if you're not doing that, then you're right. I mean, ignorance can be, you know, forgiven maybe once in a while, but consistently, that's not ignorance. That's cowardly, and you don't want to deal with
It's
that.
unprofessional conduct.
Right.
And here's a point. If we can show that unprofessional conduct has led to dead Texans, for instance, in places like Houston, Fort Hood, you know, fill in the blank, Austin,
Right.
Then that behavior becomes criminal negligence, and we put doctors and lawyers in jail for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about someone local. We weren't planning on doing this, but came up in our pre-conversation. Yasser Qadi, is that how you say it?
Yasser Qadi,
Qadi. He is a mom in Epic Center, which is about, I don't know, miles from here. And I've heard him speak on YouTube a few times, and I said, this guy is a radical. He wants us gone. He wants every other religion, doesn't matter what it is. I grew up as a Pentecostal preacher's kid, so funny thing. My dad and we were talking a few days ago. I live in a city, and there's like a Muslim neighborhood that's being built. And one of the houses, they call it a house, it's built from scratch using concrete cinder blocks, and it's fortified. And I have a picture. I sent this to someone recently, and I'm like, that's not a house. Why would you build a fortified house in the middle of a regular neighborhood? And I was talking to our chief of police, and I said, you guys cannot go in there because you don't have the tank and you don't have the equipment to go in there. You're gonna have to call somebody from Dallas or Plano, the SWAT team, to come and do something about it. It will take 40 minutes to get there. And there's nothing you can do. Our police department, this tiny city, is like 15 people. And I said, there's nothing you can do. I mean, all of us citizens come together. There's not a lot we can do if something happens in that building. And it's crazy that, you know, our city council will say, yeah, it's fine, that's a house. I'm like, it's not a house. No other house is built like that in our neighborhood. But you go into details like that, and you look at all of this, and you say, well, what are we going to do about this? And this guy's speeches on YouTube tells me what they're trying to do. So let's talk about him. You said you have seen his file before, or you investigated him, I think.
So you bring up three things that I'd like to talk about.
Okay.
Let's talk about Yasser Qadi. Let's talk about the buildings you just mentioned, and talk about police. And I'm going to like to do it in reverse order.
Okay.
So, you know, my background, I was a Force Recon Marine, did special operations in the military. At the FBI, I was on the SWAT team. I was the SWAT team leader for the last 3.5 years on the team. And we operated domestically and internationally, doing tactical operations and other things. And I share this because today when I train, and even back then, but when I train law enforcement, I ask them, are you prepared in Plano PD, DPS, local police? Are you prepared for 6 to 12 men with long rifles, heavy machine guns, and shoulder-fired rockets in your area? And I've never met a tactical team that says, yes, we're prepared for that. Everyone looks at you like, we've not even contemplated that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, have you done your homework? Because it's happened around the world. Yeah. And what happens over there will happen here if it hasn't already. But that's what they're ready for. And that's what they're preparing for.
Yeah.
And so let me transition into the second part because they're tied together. The houses. Well, you look at the mosques. First of all, we have to ask, what is a mosque? Because what most, in my experience, a large percentage of Americans, when you ask them what do you think a mosque is, they say it's like a Muslim church. Wrong. That's not true. And interestingly, most people, if I ask who's the perfect example in Islam, most people will say, oh, Muhammad is. Mm-hmm. Right. The perfect example for all Muslims for all times. So what did he use the very first mosque for? And subsequent mosques, what are they used for? Well, primarily, they're an outpost of the Islamic State. They're like an embassy, but different. It's like a forward operating base for the Islamic State, primarily, where they govern and Sharia is imposed and Sharia is adjudicated. It's where they train people. It's where they train jihadis. It's where they store weapons and ammo. It's where they plan battles, and it's the place from which they launch battles. And so if you ask guys that served in Afghanistan, Iraq, how many of the mosques that you patrolled by did you get engaged, shot at from?
Yeah.
And I have always gotten the same answer. All of them.
Right.
Right. And when on the few occasions in Germany and France, and there's one other nation I can't recall, where the federal police have actually gone in to mosques, what have they found? Weapons grade, military grade weapons. And we had a case in Detroit several years ago with a guy named Luqman Abdullah, the imam, who was killed in a gunfight with the police and the FBI because they went to raid his place. Because what were they doing? Trying to wage war against the United States in order to impose Sharia. And everyone's like, they're so radical. And what's radical about it? That's what they teach
in here
11 and 12-year-old children in Islamic schools.
You grew up with that.
That's
then
right.
That's what you know. You don't know anything else.
And it's what you do. And what in the affidavit for that case, the Luqman Abdullah case, the source, one of the several sources the FBI used, said he participated in weapons and firearms training inside the mosque, in the basement of the mosque, which wasn't on the official blueprints with the local county. Hello, this is a hint.
Yeah,
I'm hinting. So when we see like the East Valley, is it the East Valley View Mosque over in Irving?
Right.
Where is it? About 100 yards away from a high school.
Yeah.
And it looks like a fortress. Vertical windows. I mean, you just, hello.
Yeah.
They are doing what they say they're going to do, which is they're preparing for war in the United States, and they're building, and we're doing nothing. And I ask people, okay, if you're okay with building a mosque in your county, would you be okay allowing the Chinese military to build a base in your county? Because it's the same thing. Yeah. It's actually worse because it's the equivalent of like a Chinese governmental office surrounded by a military base. Right. That's what it is. Now, of course, the Islamic leaders will, publicly say, "Oh my goodness, that's just horrible. We just pray here." Well, that's a lie, and we know it's a lie.
Yeah,
because that's not what they teach their children a mosque is for. And again, I go to who's lying, and I want to make one more point before we talk about Yasser Qadi on that about Islamic law, because we mentioned earlier, how is it that what the Islamic advisors are telling our leaders, who then regurgitate it about Islam, is exactly opposite of what Muslim children learn about Islam in the most widely used text for 7th graders in the United States? Mm. Well, number one, it's a capital crime in Sharia under the law of apostasy for Muslims to teach other Muslims anything about Islam that's not true. And in Islamic law, I think I should read it so people don't think I'm just making up. We go to Book R, which is holding one's tongue. And this is what it says. right here. Book R, holding one's tongue. And I'm going to show you so you can see. Can you see what that word is right there?
Lying.
Lying. And what's that say?
Permissible.
Permissible lying.
Yeah.
It is permissible to lie if attaining the goal is permissible, and obligatory to lie to non-Muslims if the goal is obligatory. And it's obligatory for Muslims to wage jihad to establish Sharia on earth.
Is this part of the word taqiyya? Is that similar, or is it part of that?
So this is much broader than that.
Okay.
Historically, taqiyya is used is a tactic used primarily by Shia Muslims to lie to Sunni Muslims.
Okay.
To say I'm actually Sunni, so
Okay.
they won't get killed.
Right.
However, it's come in kind of common Western parlance to just mean lying. And the point is, as long as Texans and Americans understand that it's obligatory for Muslims to lie to non-Muslims if it advances Islam.
Right.
That's it. I mean, this is
their
this is
tactics are
doctrinal.
very simple. They're like,
Very simple.
we want to establish Islam in all over the world, and
right.
we're going to lie about it.
That's right.
It's not very hard.
No,
but
and the thing that's
they use our systems to do it.
That's right. And they also use, I want to be very clear here, they also use the good-hearted nature, that Christian charity, the grace of Americans to steamroll them. And I think it is a problem that a lot of people that call themselves Christian patriots are naive. They think that it's okay to open the front door of your house and let really treacherous people in the front door. And I just think it's foolish, and they're steamrolling us right now, especially in Texas.
Yeah.
So now to Yasser Qadi.
Yeah.
So when I was in the FBI, and after Yasser Qadi had moved from several of his earlier posts, and I knew him from being in the FBI because he's a senior Muslim Brotherhood leader now, one of the most prominent in North America, but was clearly an up-and-comer. And so this is back in 2004, 5.
Yeah.
Then he became the Islamic scholar at the Memphis Islamic Center in Tennessee. And they targeted, the Muslim Brotherhood made Tennessee their primary target because from their perspective, they viewed Tennessee as the buckle of the Bible Belt.
I see.
And again, they took, in my opinion, and in their opinion, they took Tennessee.
Yeah.
They captured it.
Yeah.
And so Yasser Qadi, the scholar of the Memphis Islamic Center, moved about 7.5 years ago or so from there to Plano, Texas.
Right.
And when that happened, I use the phrase, I sent up a red star cluster, in the military, it means, we're in trouble, especially to people that were in Texas that I knew, to say, this means Texas is now the target. And then what did we see them doing? They started ramping up their activities here. And now, in the last year, less than the last year, but approximately, they've been calling Muslims to Texas to fight the jihad. And this is where it is. And what do we see? An explosion. You have just in Dallas alone over 350 halal restaurants. We have now, as of last week, 314 mosques across Texas. And I actually I think
that's crazy.
84 in Harris County, 48 in Dallas County, 27 Tarrant, 22 in Collin County, 18 in Fort Bend, 15 in Bexar County, and on and on. And, we've got at every major, on every major college campus in Texas, you've got the Muslim Brotherhood's Muslim Student Association. You've got Hamas doing business as CARE in Texas. And that's a Hamas organization. You have Hamas doing business as Mgage operating in Texas. You have Hamas doing business as Students for Justice in Palestine on college campuses and kind of under the umbrella of American Muslims for Palestine. You've got the Muslim American Society operating in Texas, Muslim Brotherhood. You have, I can't off the top of my head remember the total number, but dozens of properties in Texas owned by the North American Islamic Trust, which is not only a Muslim Brotherhood organization, but in the largest terrorism financing trial in American history, U.S. versus Holy Land Foundation trial, which was adjudicated in Dallas, Texas in 2008.
Right. Mm-hmm.
NAT, N-A-I-T, was not only identified as a Muslim Brotherhood organization, but an organization that directly funds Hamas organizations and leaders. And it's operating all over Texas. You have the Islamic Society of North America, also identified in that trial as a Muslim Brotherhood organization directly funding Hamas, operating in Texas with subsidiaries operating in Texas, and on and on. And the list goes on. And numerous Islamic schools, I think at last count, we have just in DFW and across Texas, well, I can't even keep up. This was 2019 numbers, 15 Islamic schools, and the number is growing. And now you've got right here in Garland, a massive Quranic academy led by a terrorist, another jihadi. So it's everywhere. And Yasser Qadi, who's running the Plano Islamic Center, is not only a senior Muslim Brotherhood jurist, he is the senior Muslim Brotherhood jurist. He's the chairman of the Fiqh Council of North America, which is the Muslim Brotherhood's legal entity that oversees the entire Islamic movement in North America to ensure that everything they're doing is compliant with Sharia. He's the guy. So the fact that we have the mayor of Plano kissing his ass and going to these events and on video saying, I'm protecting him, and if you don't like it, you can move somewhere else. I would argue there's a crime being committed there. That's very close to material support. It's certainly, I think federally, you're now crossing into aiding and abetting an adversary in wartime.
Right.
If we understood we're actually at war. You've got police chiefs doing the same thing.
Yeah.
You've got state legislators standing up, Pakistan Day. Every year in the Texas legislature, Hamas, doing business as CARE, hosts Muslim Day at the state capitol.
Right.
And
at the Republican state capitol.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. This is, so the Texans that I teach and train, that I've met and that my colleagues have met, they're the people that get it, although it's still, I think, a small percentage of Texans, they're livid because they see it. And when I go out and train other communities across Texas, they can't believe, like I normally ask at the beginning, how many of you feel like you got a good handle on this? And, usually a third or a half will raise their hands. And within the first 60 to 90 minutes, their jaw will be on the table because they're like, we had no idea it was this bad. I'm like, oh, it's much worse. I'm just going to keep laying it out for you.
Yeah.
So whether we're talking about just in the last few years, the number of Sharia compliant banking systems in Texas that are being used, the number of Islamic schools, the number of mosques that are being built and the rate at which they're being built, the number of jihadis coming to Texas, the number of just across the board, the jihadi organizations. But if we just look at Muslim Brotherhood organizations like the East Plano Islamic Center, like Epic City, like a senior North American Muslim Brotherhood leader like Yasser Qadi, when I hear the governor say the Muslim Brotherhood's a terrorist organization, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So what do we have the tools legally, and I'll say this one last thing. You asked a question earlier about the Constitution. The Constitution gives governors the authority to wage war when they've been invaded.
That's true.
I would make a legal argument. There is so much evidence that you could put in an affidavit. You wouldn't have to, because he can put it in a statement and say, I'm exercising my constitutional duty to use every organization under my authority to wage war back. It's no longer, this is not a policy matter. It's not a political matter. It's not a legislative matter. It's a war.
I was talking to someone last night, and I mentioned, because all of this came together within the last 15 hours. And I said, hey, I'm meeting with John Guandolo, and we're going to talk about this. And he said, well, you think it's going to be a priority at the Republican state convention? I said, that's the goal. I want people to know in depth what they need to hear now, so they have another 50, 60 days before they can prepare and ask questions. And he said, well, how about property tax? And I said, yes, property tax is going to be probably number one priority, maybe number two priority. And he said, you're right, Abraham. We have to be alive to be worried about property tax. And I said, you're right. That's the attitude. And he goes, you know what? I'm in for the no Sharia law in Texas first. Then, property tax next. So it's, our state convention is coming. Prop 10 was a huge success. We did that to expose the problem that we were facing. Any proposition is basically a poll. That's what it is. I mean, it's not a law. This is a direction for the legislator to look at and say, okay, 95% of Republicans in Texas said, I need to go take care of this problem. So, but at the convention, what are your suggestions for Republican delegates, for them to know and learn about it now? So where do they go? What do they need to look at to do all the homework that they can get before they get to the state convention?
So this is a great question, and I appreciate you asking it. Over the years, even while I was still in the FBI, I was asked, especially once what I was doing inside the FBI became known to entities outside the FBI, other government agencies, people that were I was introduced to who knew senior government officials at the federal level. And they would walk me in and I would spend time briefing them. And I briefed, former FBI, CIA, DIA directors, chairman of Homeland Security, Intel committees, Judiciary Committee, numerous, literally well over 100 members of Congress, 3- and 4-star generals and admirals. The problem was those leaders, with the exception of a handful that everybody knows that did something that myself and my colleague worked with, Michelle Bachmann, Louis Gohmert, Alan West, Trent Franks, Dan Lundgren, Sue Myrick, Chip Kravac from Minnesota. These people put their necks out on the line and really did great work in hearings, trying to get investigations going. And they were lambasted primarily by Republican leadership. Michelle Bachmann was called out by the senior Republican leadership. And all she was saying was the Muslim Brotherhood is basically, she wrote letters to every inspector general across the government and said the Muslim Brotherhood is essentially running a counterintelligence, espionage, subversion campaign, which they are, and it should be investigated. Or she actually posed it as a question. Don't you believe it should be investigated? Followed by a whole statement of facts. Where we are today. So I worked at the national level, I worked at the state level, and sadly, when I built this training program when I moved to Texas 8 years ago, called Into Action for citizens, that's when it started to take off, because citizens are usually unencumbered by the pressures that politicians and senior level people are, be they real or imagined. And that's what I think got this thing going. So number one, I think getting that training, my website's johnguandolo.com, so I encourage people to use it. But when you ask, what can people do? So I've written 3 books.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So,
and these are, right. It's an easy to read book. Right. The second book, so The Raising a Jihadi Generation, is about the Islamic movement in the United States, primarily Muslim Brotherhood.
Right.
The second book, Islam's Deception, The Truth About Sharia, is all about Sharia. And I think it's, again, not much bigger, only a few pages more than that one. Easy to read book, but puts it all into perspective. And the book I've just finished that I actually have a call today with a publisher, but it's going to be published, looks like in the next 90 days or less, called The Campaign Plan for Victory. How do we actually win this thing?
Okay.
And what do you do? And basically it takes the training that we do in Into Action and breaks it into pieces. So if people never get the opportunity to go to the training, it's a handbook for them.
Right.
Now, the other things that I think are vital on my website under the reports, there's a report I did year and a half ago called, Hamas in America. And it was a response to the attacks in Israel by Hamas. In, about 30 pages, really puts the whole movement, including the communists working with the jihadis, into real detailed perspective, as well as laying out the hostile network and what they're doing, how they're doing it. There's also, under the jihadi resources, there's a document called Sharia's Role in the War. And it's just topics and quotes from Sharia sourced. And I originally, a colleague of mine and I put it together when we were working in DOD to help military commanders pull their heads out of their butts who were clueless. I mean, we literally, Abraham, we've been waging war for over 2 decades against an enemy that our generals can't identify, and neither can our secretaries of defense. The present secretary, not sure about, but previous ones for sure, can't identify the enemy. And you can't win a war like that. And that's, I would argue, and I do argue, that's why we lost in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and parts of Africa where we were fighting, even though our military crushed them on the battlefield. So those are some of the resources I strongly encourage people to look at. And I want to say this. I built that first training program. It was a 2-week training program. It was originally scheduled to be 4 weeks. I have a 2-week train the trainer program that teaches people how to teach what I'm talking about. And then we have the 1 to 2 day into action for citizens, and then a 3-day program for law enforcement, National Guard, intelligence professionals, military, understanding and investigating hostile networks, which is all about the communist and Islamic movements. And again, I ran one a couple months ago here in Texas. Okay. And I would say, talking to most of the police beforehand, walking in, I said, "Do you know what this course is about?" They're like, "Yeah, the sheriff sponsored it." And we had citizens actually financially supported it. Right. And they said, "I know what it's about. I don't know much about the threat." And at the end, I always ask this question. Raise your hand if you knew this material before you came in here. 0 hands. Raise your hand if you believe this is critical to protecting your community. 100% of the hands. And there were 3 or 4 in the crowd that up until day 3 were still a little skeptical. But when I started teaching them how you research the threat, because a couple of them were from areas that are kind of remote, an hour north of Dallas. And they're like, "Well, we know it's a problem in Dallas. It's not up here." And within 30 minutes of me saying, "Okay, here's how you do it. Now I'm going to give you 30 minutes, go." I had 4 different people in the room go, "Holy crap. Yeah. I just discovered this."
In my backyard.
Like, yeah. I'm like, "I had that, but I didn't want to tell you. I was hoping you would find it. You found it." Yeah. All these people, and they're like, and it's massive. Right. And I was like, "That's right. In your little old remote county, it's massive." Yeah. But you didn't know about it. But now you do. And what are you going to do about it? Right. So all I believe I have been for 25 years is not only a messenger to kind of ring the bell, sound the alarm, but also give people a toolbox. Citizens, leaders, and police, and others, people in the business community. But over the years, most people have not done anything about it, even when they've come to know about it. I'm not going to say the names, but in Texas, I've spoken to several huge conferences since I've been here in the last 8 years. Yeah. And it wasn't until a few weeks ago I spoke to one with 400 or so people, but I spoke to one with 1,500 people 6 years ago. And that was the last time they ever called me. Oh. And it's because, this is just uncomfortable.
It's very uncomfortable.
And we don't see it as the threat you see it as. Yeah. Now, of course, I'm getting calls from those people. And they're like, "Hey, oh yeah, sure, I'll help you. But remember when you said I was mean? Yeah. And you didn't like the way I talked, but now you're realizing all of it was true? This is the problem." And I get it. It's a hard pill to swallow. Yeah. But I believe you got to live in reality. And if you don't, you end up where Texas finds itself right now. You can only kick the can down the road so far before you figure out it's an IED and it blows up in your face. Yeah. That's kind of where we are.
It's interesting because, and I mentioned earlier, I was talking to my dad, who was a Pentecostal preacher. I mean, I grew up in South India until I was about 16 before we moved here. And in South India, I grew up in a state that's primarily Christian state. I mean, but I grew up in a place where it was I would say about 98% is, 95% is Hindus, and about 2 to 3% is Muslims, and barely a percentile of Christians in that area. And I was talking to my dad about this whole Sharia thing and Islam thing and all of that. And my dad made I don't know if it was a joke or he was concerned. He said, we thought we were going to get killed by Hindus in India. Now we're here. We're going to get killed by Muslims here. And, I thought it was funny. And I said, no, we're going to take care of this. And he responded by saying, politicians, really? You think that? And I said, oh, I'm part of it now. But one of the things that you look at other countries, France, England, many nations that are clearly Western nations who became something else now. It's like, there's you look at UK and you see churches closing down and turning them into mosques over and over again. I mean, 400, 500-year-old churches are closing down because there's not enough people who wants to go there. And there was an invasion in UK. There was an invasion in France. There is an invasion in US now. How do you connect that to a strong warning? Because a lot of people, like you said, they hear about it for a conference, they hear about it at a convention, then they get scared, they go home and they focus on something else, so they don't want to deal with this. They hope that someone else is going to take care of this. And the cavalry is coming. Like, no, there isn't. This is it. We're it. If you can talk about that, and we will kind of conclude that with the podcast.
So this is a great place to kind of conclude. First of all, in this journey of nearly 25 years, I've learned a lot about human nature, more than I knew before I had been on this journey, both inside and outside the government. And I've learned that most people won't buy a fire extinguisher until their front door is on fire, and usually until it's consumed and the house is burning. And I don't. It's been hard to break through that. I've also learned that there is a large percentage, I usually say between 30 and 40%, the numbers might be higher, of people that are psychologically, when they understand how bleak the situation is, they psychologically shut down. But I also want to say to the patriots out there that who do get this, it doesn't take many. During the revolution, it was a small number of patriots that led the revolution, that fought in the revolution, even while a pretty strong group of colonists were not in favor of the revolution because they didn't know what was good for them. Yeah. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean that they wanted no confrontation more than they were realizing they were sacrificing their future liberty.
Right.
And I think that's human nature. Like, I don't fault them.
Yeah.
They're probably good people. Now, remember, we have enemies here. Right. There's a strong communist movement here.
There's an unholy alliance
between
the Islamists and the communists, which does not make any sense because they're in.
Well, it does, because they both want the destruction of America, and in the end, they'll fight each other. My money is on the jihadis, not the people who don't know what gender they are, but that's just me. I will say that, but this is really important. 2009, I was invited to be at a conference, not speak at a conference, which confused me because the guy who hosted the conference knew me well. He's a Brit, knew of my work inside the FBI and then in DOD. And I was in the DOD at the time, invited me over with some colleagues. And we sat in the audience at the Military Academy of the UK in Shrivingham while jihadi after jihadi got up and were the primary presenters.
Oh, wow.
And because the guy who hosted it's much smarter than me, because I was like, what are they doing?
Yeah.
And then I raised my hand and asked a question. And we were all seated in different parts of the audience, so we were not lumped together because we were at least that savvy. And when I would ask a question, and my colleague would ask a question, and we'd start boxing the bad guys in. And the purpose of doing that was to help, because we had literally judges,
right,
military leaders, civilian leaders in the room. It was a pretty packed place. And I realized why he had us there. He knew we couldn't present because it would have created a riot. Right. But by asking questions, we were putting questions in the heads of the leadership. Now, of course, they ended up surrendering anyway. And my professional opinion is the UK is conquered. It's over. Here's the funny thing. I had private meetings with members of parliament, retired 3-star general, people with noble titles,
right,
privately. And a couple of them said, this is just like you Americans to exaggerate a threat. And even my very good friend, who is the director of intelligence for the largest private defense organization in the UK, was like, I think you're overblowing it. But a little while later, when Lee Rigby, a soldier, was beheaded in Woolwich outside of England, I got a call the following day, and he's like, yeah, his wife and he were looking for property in Switzerland. I'm like,
yeah,
I never wanted to be the guy that said, I told you so. I think the answer is I never do a training program without teaching the founding principles and understanding in the first sentence of the Declaration. And our Constitution cannot be understood without looking at it through the lens of the ideal, the Declaration, that our rights come from God, that we are all, those rights can never be surrendered because they're a part of who we are, because we're imbued with those rights, that these self-evident truths are truths, they're objective truths. And in the first sentence of the Declaration, that the law of nature and the law of nature's God, the God of the Old and New Testament, legally defined at the time in the law book that was used for 150 years in the United States, and the one the founders leaned on, Blackstone's Commentaries, define those two phrases as, respectively, the will of God as he reveals himself and Holy Scripture. And that's the moral standard for the Republic.
Yeah.
So we don't need new laws. The Constitution already says in Article 6, this Constitution shall be the supreme law of the land. In Article 3, the Supreme Court's the supreme legal, system of jurisprudence. That's it. And those founding principles, you can't legislate anything that violates those. And our leaders have, but we the citizens have allowed it. So what citizens, I encourage them to do is you have to know who we're supposed to be, and you need to study the enemy. Yeah. And when you do that, the contrast becomes black and white, literally. And that is the first part. And the second part is you have to know that this is a real war, and we are in the pre-kinetic phase right now. And it is going to go kinetic because they say so. They're planning on it right now. They're talking about it. In September and October, they were holding meetings about it around the country, the Islamic movement and the communists, holding meetings and conferences to talk about when and how. And now it's not even there. Every day you can go to social media. And
they're very open about it.
And there are moms saying, and moms in Michigan, and moms in Minnesota, and moms in Florida saying, go to Texas, go fight the jihad. Not go to Iran, not go to Afghanistan, go to Texas.
Right.
And so long as we keep putting our heads in the sand, we're going to lose. Again, I'll say it one more time. This is a real war. Wars are not won by fixing policies or changing issues or legislating. Wars are won by identifying and vanquishing the enemies. Our leaders, our governor, our president, have all the authority they need, all the laws they need. They don't need any more. They just need to do it. That's it. But they're not going to do it if the people aren't behind them. And so people point to, and I'm guilty of it, point to the governor, point to the attorney general and say, well, they failed us.
But you didn't back them.
You didn't back them.
Right.
You notice when the governor of Texas first said something is when the people were like, holy crap. Like literally we are overrun.
Yeah.
And he's like, I need to address this. Right. So if the people, we are the government. Right. We can't say the government sucks. Well,
it's us.
Right. It's us.
There's nobody else coming. Yeah.
So we have to.
Yeah.
I think this conversation, this is why I really appreciate this conversation. And I pray that our leaders here, but I'm not doing this for the leaders. I'm doing this that I hope Texans and Americans outside of Texas, but Texans hear this. We have to put freedom on the offensive where it belongs. We have to remember we're not just the legacy of those who fought and died at the Alamo. We're the legacy of those who were victorious at San Jacinto. And we're at that point again. We have to be willing to risk everything, or this whole thing is over.
Yeah. Well, the Imam uses words like, we have conquered France, we have conquered UK, we're coming for Texas. Well, I really appreciate you coming by and
thank you for having me. I really appreciate this conversation.
Yeah. And thank you for all the work you've done and you're doing and your service to our nation. And we will kind of come together at the convention and kind of wrap up this whole deal, if that's okay with you.
That's okay by me.
All right. I am more scared than ever before, not for me, but, well, for me and honestly for about the future of Texas and our generation to come. This is why this conversation matters. And Texans believe in religious freedom, but we do not compromise on rule of law. This is one of the systems that are a parallel system that we will not allow, a structure, a parallel government that we are going to have to fight. As we head to the state convention, this issue is rising to the top of the priorities because Texans understand what's at stake. We're going to face it head on, deal with it with the facts, and make it absolutely clear that only Texas law governs Texas, period. John, I really appreciate you coming up and bringing this issue to the forefront of our state convention, and we will continue to fight this.
Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah, we'll get this done.